everyone, what's up? I'm Blue Sirens, and today I want to talk to you about something that I think is pretty hard to do as a musician and as a producer, and that is sampling. Now, before we dive into sampling, we're going to talk about two different things in this video. We're going to talk about sampling and using samples. What's the difference? We'll get into that here in a little bit, but before we do, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe below. Now, what's the difference between using samples and sampling? For me, sampling is when you find a song and you say, I want to use elements of that song, and you cut that song up yourself. And you use either just the bass line, the drum line, it could be a section, it could be loop, you pitch it up, you pitch it down, whatever it is. And then using samples is when you're finding things that people have already cut up and you put that into your song. That could be a one shot, that could be a loop, but you're not necessarily finding the original song yourself and putting it in your music. You're using something someone else has kind of made before. Now, sampling it's pretty tough. I can't do it really well. And I have thought about trying to do it, and I've thought about trying to learn to do it, but you have to have a really good ear for it, and it's something I don't have, but I'm going to be working on that, I think, in the future. Sampling is really tough. There are some really good resources, though, if you are looking into doing it, that you can find some things to sample. And one of those that I want to talk about is called Samplet. There's a link in the description below, but Samplet is essentially a website that searches YouTube for any genre of music, any time frame, any BPM. There's lots of different filters you can put on it to where YouTube will then spit out something that meets that criteria, and you can listen to it right there on the website. And if you like it, then you can see about trying to find that song somewhere else on the internet, or maybe YouTube has a download and put it in your DAW and see about trying to make a song with it. Now, the only downside to this is that when you do that, those songs have not been cleared for a sample. You will need to contact the owner of the song to get those samples clear if you're planning on releasing that music. If you're just going to make it for fun or for your own use or for practice, then no need to. But anything you want to release officially on streaming services, you're going to need to get those samples cleared. So take a look, see who owns it, because if you're planning on releasing the song in the future or writing a song you might want to release in the future, you want to make sure there's some form of contact of the rights owner that you can reach out to be able to release this song and get those samples cleared. Overall, Samplet is a great website. It's a great way to be able to find songs to sample, and overall, just look around for some inspiration. I've spent some time on that website, and I have hardly ever found a song that I've recognized because it just spits out so much music I've never heard of. So if you're looking for inspiration or potential songs to sample, Samplet, great website. Can't recommend it enough. Another resource you can use is Tracklib. Now, Tracklib has songs that you can download, and you have to use credits to purchase a song. Sometimes they're free, but overall, those songs already have the clearance. So you can use those without having to contact anybody to clear the samples from those songs. And sometimes it's a whole song or a snippet of a song, but you can cut that up however you want to and put it in your song however you want to. It's a great site for that. Again, I'm not very good at sampling songs in that way, so it's not something that I've explored, but the fact that they've cleared those rights for you when you start to use those songs so you can just dive straight into creation is really good. I would highly recommend checking that website out as well too. Now, if you're just getting into sampling, or maybe you've been in the game for a while and you need some help or some advice, I would recommend you check out Produced by Perez on Instagram or on TikTok and all of the streaming services. His artist name is I Make Things I Like. Nick Perez is his name. He was on my podcast, Creative Curves. There's a link to our interview below where he talks about his inspiration for sampling and a little bit about his process. I would recommend checking that out. You can also hit him up on Instagram and get his thoughts on sampling or his advice. He's been doing it for quite a while, so if you need help or just want some advice, or maybe just want to talk to someone that has been doing sampling for a while and gain their perspective, hit him up. Now, the other aspect of sampling is using samples. These are samples that someone else has already found. They've already cut it up and they've got like a loop for you, or they've got a one shot, or maybe they've made them themselves and say, hey, you can use these however you want to in your song. You just got to buy them. The two main websites that people use for this are LANDR and Splice. Now, I personally, between the two, I like LANDR a little bit more. I think LANDR has a lot more to offer and can do a little bit more for you as well. So LANDR, a couple years ago, I did the LANDR Studio package where you get classes, you get plugins, you get sample credits, and that was like 2 years ago, and I still haven't used all my sample credits. So they give you a lot, and I use some of their plugins still to this day. But overall, I like the samples on LANDR a bit more because there are, in my perspective and opinion, there's more that fit my needs. And of course, that's lo-fi needs. I never really found ones on Splice that really matched what I was looking for. And all of those samples sound really polished. I can't really put my own spin or effect on them because they kind of sound good already, which some people might really like, thinking there's not a lot you have to do for those samples. You can just plug and play. But I like being able to add my own touch or my own perspective on a sample instead of just dragging something in and calling it good. Now, the majority of samples I use are drum samples, and there's nothing wrong with using samples in that way, but there's plenty of samples out there for other instruments you can find on LANDR and Splice. And I'm just saying I mostly use drum samples because that's mostly what I've limited my experience to when using these sites. I think LANDR is a bit better, but there is a bit of downsides for LANDR, which the only one I can think of at this moment is that some of the samples you may download in a full pack, some of them sound pretty similar to each other. So I can't say if one sample, if taken to an extreme, sounds different than the other sample, but when they just are in the pack themselves, sometimes there are some samples that I can barely tell the difference in. Maybe my ear's not as good as other people's, but still, not what I like when I download a sample pack. I'd like everything to be a little bit more unique than having to guess, didn't I just play that sample already? When really it's two different samples that just sound pretty similar. Those are two big websites that people go to for getting samples. Now, the next place to get samples, I think, is honestly the best place. And they have a lot fewer amount of samples, but overall, I think the quality is a lot higher. And that's when you buy samples from individual artists. I get some of my samples from Teatro and from Eldre. And they don't have a ton of samples. I think Eldre only has like maybe 6 or 7 sample packs. Teatro, maybe 3 or 4. But they have some really unique sounds in their sample packs that whenever I'm looking for a rim shot, a snare, or a shaker, I'm often drawn back to the ones that I heard in their kits because their samples are so unique. They themselves are also artists making music, so they know what they want in their samples when they make music. So when they're making samples to sell to people, they also have that same mentality and perspective of, I want to make sure this is going to be good for when someone uses it. The product is for other people to make art, not just to make money in their case. So I think their samples are pretty high quality. I would recommend you go and check them out. I'll put links to both their websites in the description below for you to check out their samples and maybe buy a couple of them. Now, the last place to get samples that I can recommend is yourself. Make your own samples. There's some really great equipment from Tascam that you can get that will let you make your own samples if it's field recordings or just something around your house you want to record. You can even use your iPhone. I would make sure you switch your iPhone over to Wave Recording if you're using the Voice Memos app, or if you've downloaded a third-party app for sampling, just make sure it's set to Wave so you can get a higher quality recording. But you yourself have the ability to make your own samples, and you may find that to be the highest form of samples possible. There's a video that was floating around on Instagram a while ago of someone using an apple to make a hi-hat sound. They just cut it with a knife, and it sounded really good. And they use that as a hi-hat. Genius. But I don't know many places that would be making samples like that with fruit. But this guy chose to. So I think maybe making your own samples is going to be the way for you to find your own unique sound or a sound that you really like. Is it tough to make samples here on your own? I don't know. I've tried a couple times, and you have to have a really quiet environment, I feel, to do it. So it can be tough. You don't have to have specific equipment, but the better equipment you have, the clearer the sample can be. So it really varies. It depends. It'd be great if there were some resources on how to make some really good clean samples. If you have some, drop them in the comments below. Share it with the community. But until then, these are the options that I would recommend. LANDR, creating your own samples, and of course, going to artists that make music themselves and getting samples directly from them. But where do you guys like to get samples? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace.